Designing WPF controls, especially with MVVM, can be tricky, so I decided to create a mini-series on the various controls we have access to in WPF and how you can wire them up properly. Even if a video covers a control you're familiar with, you'll probably see an advanced use case or two that'll be of benefit. In this first video, we're going to cover combo boxes, including how to get the data about the selected item and how to cascade the combo boxes. Now, if you're new to this channel, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. This channel is full of videos explaining the various parts of C#. I also have a website where I provide full courses on C# and SQL. In fact, I have a start-to-finish course that includes an add-on where I replace the user interface with a WPF user interface. If that sounds interesting to you, check out the link in the description to get the main course and the WPF add-on course for a total of only $97. That's a $10 discount off the normal price. Now, if you want to check out the ASP.NET MVC add-on as well, I'll give you an extra $15 off if you add that course to the bundle. That's over 40 hours of real-world instruction for less than $3 an hour. Okay, let's get started in our example project. In this series, I'm going to be using the same starter application to make things easier. If you want the code for this video, click on the link in the description to go to a blog post for this video. Now, a starter project consists of a class library and a WPF project that is configured to use the Caliburn Micro, which is my preferred MVVM tool. If you haven't used Caliburn Micro before, or if you want to know more about it, check out my video on this channel titled WPF in C# with MVVM using Caliburn Micro. Yep, it's a pretty long title. But that video will get you started in Caliburn Micro. Then come on back here to watch this control video. So let's get a quick preview of this project here, just to get kind of comfortable with what the various parts are. And we'll start in the demo library. We have two models here, an address model, which is simply just an address. So street address, city, state, zip. The full address is a read-only property that returns the various parts the address kind of put together. And finally, we also have an address ID, which is just a number. The person model is very similar. We have a person ID instead of an address ID, a first name, a last name, an age, a date of birth, an is alive property, which is a Boolean. These are set up so I can have various different types to play with. So they are valid properties, but I probably wouldn't have all of these in here. For example, age. Typically you don't have age, you have just date of birth, but I'm going to calculate the age of a person based upon their date of birth. So account balance, let's just say it's a checking account or account at a company or whatever. That's a dollar amount, so that's why it's decimal. We have a list of addresses, so a person can have one or more addresses they live at. We have a primary address, which is an address model. And then full name, which is just their first and last name. The only other file in the demo library is the data access file. Now, this is a fun one and one that you might want to take a deeper look at later on. You can download the code off my blog. But the reason why is because this is going to simulate going to the database. It's not actually going to go to the database. I want to have that wiring up process and making sure you have the database if you want to run this on your machine. So instead what I did was I created one method called getPeople, the only public method besides the constructor. So the getPeople method says how many people do you want in total? And it defaults to 10. And it returns a list of people that would total 10 if you didn't specify anything, or whatever number you specified. And so it goes through and it loops through and it says get a person. What does get person do? Which is private. It gets a person, but the first name is a random first name. The last name is a random last name. The is alive status is a random alive status, and so on and so forth. We also get a random date. We get an age in years of the person based upon their date. And then also their account balance is a random decimal number. And that's between 1 penny and I believe $10,000. We also add a random number of addresses between 1 and 5. There's a random address as well. And so here's my actual randomizer, which looks pretty, it's pretty small. It's one line of code, but it uses generics, and you pass in a list, and it gives you a random item out of that list. So what lists do I have? Well, here is street addresses, cities, states, zips, first name, last name, a live status, which is just true or false. And then this is used for the random date. So that's what I did. These are the names I have. What it's going to do is take a combination. It's going to grab one street address. It's going to grab one city, one state, one zip code, one first name, one last name, and there you go. So in the code itself, all I need to do is call the getPeople method, and it will get me, if I use the defaults, it'll give me 10 people, each of which has between 1 and 5 addresses. So that's what that code does. It uses random quite heavily, and if you want to know more about random, I'll cover that in a future video. But for right now, you can use example code because the example code works. But that's really it. I mean, when it comes down to it, publicly exposed is just this one method. So that's what we'll use. In fact, I already have it wired up. So on the WPF side of things, I have the shell view, which is my main view. We're not going to use multiple forms in this series. We're just going to use the shell view and just put our stuff right on that view. So that's the shell view, which is just right now has row definitions, and that's it. The shell view model, though, has a bindable collection of type person model called people. And in the constructor, we set up a new bindable collection, and we get the people from our data access. So that's it. We're going to get 10 people when we bind or when we call this shell view constructor. Or sorry, the shell view model constructor. All right, so that's it. We've got a starting point because we know that the people property will now be populated. Now, since I use bindable collection, which that's part of Caliburn.micro, so a bindable collection handles things like alerting us when something has changed in the list. So it will update on the view itself. So let's go to our view, and let's start by looking over how we do a combo box. That's kind of the focus of this video is combo boxes, although we're going to kind of do a few more things just to kind of show some kind of advanced use cases of the combo box. Let's start off really simple. And so I'm going to say combo box, and let's just put it on grid.row0, just the top row. It's going to default to that anyways, but I like to specify it. We're going to say items source equals binding inside curly braces people. So now what we've done is we've bound this combo box to people. And inside here we can say combo box dot item template. And the reason why I do this is that item template allows us to do more than just display one property if you want to. We can have multiple properties in here if we want. So inside the item template, let's look at the data template. And inside here, you can basically do whatever you want. Now, we're going to start off really simple, and we're going to say, let's display a text block. And the text is going to be binding full name. That's it. So remember that the person model has this property, this auto property called, or this read-only property called full name. And full name is just first name and last name with a space in between. So what we're doing here is we're manually binding the item source to be people. And we're then saying, well, in there, for each item, this is the data template, so it's going to be displayed. I want you to display the full name. Well, how does it know where that full name is? Well, it's essentially doing a for each. And so it says, okay, each of the items in people is a person model. Therefore, the properties on person model include the full name properties. That's where it gets it. Let's just start right there real quick, and we'll run this thing. And before we do, let's set the Windows startup location equal to center screen. So it starts on this screen. And there we go. So now we have our shell view. It doesn't look very nice, but we've got this combo box in this space right here. And in fact, we could put some padding around it, but let's leave it just like it is right now. Hit the drop down, and there you go. Now there are 10 people in this drop down that we can select. Okay, so we have all 10 people that came from the database. Now notice it starts at Bob Wilson and ends at Santiago Hernandez. If I were to close this out, just to prove that it is randomly generating that list, Santiago Miller is the first one, and Monique Martinez is the last one. So it is generating a unique list every time. So there we go. We have a combo box wired up. Now, the one thing that is not really Caliburn Micro standard is this item source equals binding people. We don't have to do this. In fact, let me show you the other way we could do this. If I have said x:name equals people, that does the same thing. And the reason why is it goes out and says, okay, I've got a combo box named people. Let me see if I have a property called people in my view model. And it finds the people and it binds it to the item source. But the reason I showed you the binding way is because there's sometimes that it just doesn't match up. Maybe you can't name this combo box people. Maybe it's something that's stopping you from doing that. And so maybe it's because you have two different drop downs on the same page that both point to people. Well, you can use the alternate method, which is to have that item source equals binding people. Don't have both. Do one or the other. But this way, you can have a choice which way you want to go. For now, I'm going to leave this as name equals people because it's simpler. One of the places it won't work is binding this text box here because of the fact that it's nested and it's looking at a property of an object that's inside a list of people. So you bind it based upon the actual property name and just say binding. So you have to do both in these kind of scenarios since we're doing kind of edge stuff, not the standard easy stuff like text blocks and text boxes and those kind of things. But it's still pretty powerful stuff. Now, I remember I said that data template, we're doing something really simple here. So let's kind of up our game a little bit. So let's add to what we display in the text box. So I'm actually going to cut this out temporarily. I'm going to add a stack panel. I'll set the orientation to horizontal. You don't have to, but I'm going to. And now in the stack panel, I can add multiple things. So let's add back our text block, which is our full name. Let's add another text block. And we'll say the text for this one equals, let's start off with a space and a dash and a space and say, are they alive, : space. Because don't forget we have that is alive property. There we go. And now let's add a checkbox and say it's got a vertical alignment of center. I don't know why they don't set them automatically. They're always up too high for my liking. So the is checked property to be a binding and set its binding to is alive. There we go. So now we're binding. Oh, we got to close it out. There we go. So now we're binding not just one thing in the combo box, but 3 things. Their full name, some text that says, are they alive? And then a checkbox. Let's look at what this looks like. So now our drop down has Frank Wilson. Are you alive? Yes. Down here, Daniel Taylor is not. And neither is Bob Jones or John Wilson. But the really cool thing is we can even allow edits. These edits are actually being saved to our list. So if we were to see that down below, we'd see those checkboxes indeed are changing. Those values are being saved. Now you could lock that out, but we're going to leave it alone and actually look at displaying what's selected down here. Okay. So let's do that. Let's grab and find out which item is selected. So the way we do that is to have a selected item for our combo box. But we don't have anything to wire it up to. So let's go over to our shell view model and create a new property. And we'll do a full property for this. Prop full, tab twice. And let's say that this is going to be a person model. And we'll call this selected person. Oops. Underscore selected person. And now we need selected person here. And the one thing I want to change is that when you set it, I want to have that notify of property change. There we go. We need to add the user statement for that. Actually, no, we just need to inherit from screen. Forgot to do that. So that's part of Caliburn Micro. The base class has some methods in it, including notify of property change. So anytime now that we set the selected person, it's going to let everybody know that selected person has been changed. So now we can grab this, just copy it, go back over here and say selected item and set that equal to binding selected person. So now the selected person will get updated every time we change what we've selected in the dropdown. But in order to show that, let's add a text block and set its name to be selected person underscore full name. Now, what am I doing here? Well, I know that the selected person is an object. I can't just bind that to the name because that's going to show the toString for that object, which is going to be nothing productive. But with Caliburn Micro, one of the conventions is if I have an underscore, it's the equivalent of a dot. And so it's selected person dot full name, which is the full name of the person selected. So if we run this now, right now there's nothing down here. But if I select, if I try to select, the dropdown is not currently working. Let's find out why. It probably has to do with the fact that I did not specify grid.row equals 1. So we've got an overlay issue here. Let's try it again. Now we can select something from the dropdown. Let's select Carla Lee. and nothing happens. I think I have, yep, there's the issue. Okay, so the issue is I'm actually notifying of property change before I change the value, which seems silly. Let's change that around. Small little details will trip you up. Okay, John Hernandez down below. Monique Martinez, there she is down below. So by just selecting which one I want, it updates another control. That's kind of fun. But now what if we have these addresses, which we haven't really used yet. What if once I select a person, I want to see a list of addresses that are associated with that person? Well, we can do that with a drop-down. So let's do a little bit of manipulation on the front end. So let's change this to be 2 for grid row 2. And we're going to copy and paste this. But before we do, if we notice in the address model, the person model, we have primary address in the address model. So let's grab this. And then we're going to say primary address underscore, and it's not full name, it's full address. So what's going to happen is when we select an address, it's going to update this text block. Let's copy our combo box, and we'll paste it down below. We're going to set this to be, this is going to be selected person underscore addresses. That's the list of our addresses. And the binding for the selected item is going to be selected person underscore selected our primary address. So we set our binding here to full address. And we're going to take off the rest of these. We don't need to have the more advanced case here. So let's see how this looks. Well, I forgot to change my row number again. Oops. That's why copy and paste is tricky. Here we go. So this is right now empty. There's nothing in here. If I select Robert Taylor, now I have 4 different addresses because Robert Taylor has these 4 addresses associated with his account. If I select one, nothing happens down below. So we got to fix that. But we now can see that if I select somebody, notice it went blank again, there's 3 addresses. There's 4 addresses. Let's see if we have, there's 3 addresses. Does anybody else have anything other than that? There you go, 1 address. So we now have cascading drop-downs based upon nested data. So let's address that final issue, which is the text block not showing the primary address's full address. And I think the reason for that has to do with the fact that we're not actually triggering a notify of property change here when we're selecting this item, because it goes into a normal control, not one that has a notify of property change. Now at this point, I have a couple different options you can do. One is, because we don't control, now this is intentional, because we don't control these models here, we can't just go into address model and put on there a notify of property change. We could bring these models in or make copies of them and then change them to add the notifications and all the rest inside of our UI. And that can be the right answer sometimes. But I think in this case, it's overkill. And so what we're going to do instead is we're going to add an event on this combo box. So it says whenever you change which item is selected, then we're going to update or call this method, which will say notify a property change. That's another way of doing it. The final way is maybe we don't even have to bother with this. So I'm going to show you the event way just to show you, but we're not going to do it that way. I think we're going to do instead is just create a property on our shell view model that is primary address selected, and then also make sure that it updates the selected item in the selected person. Okay, so that's what we're going to do eventually. But I do want to show you this event thing just in case you have some instance like this where you kind of got to call an event. Because I can tell you right now that the first thing that I thought of was, oh, what I'll do is I will put the event in here, and that would be like the, I think it's selection changed. Yep. So I'll just say binding and then put a method name here. That won't work. Sorry. It would seem obvious, but that's not how it's wired up. And there's reasons for that. Let's put it that way. But what we need to do instead is come up here to our window itself, and we're going to add a thing that says XMLNS cal equals http:// www.caliburnproject.org. Okay, so what this is doing is specifying basically a shortcut, a namespace. That's what the NS is for, namespace. And so cal is now our namespace. We can choose whatever word we want or whatever, like there's X and there's D and there's MC and local, and those are standard. And that's bringing in these different things. These are imports, basically. Well, I'm bringing in the caliburnproject.org specification here. So now down here, I can say, let's give me a space here. I can say cal : message.attach. And then I'm going to specify which event I want to listen for. Event, in square brackets, by the way. And it's selection changed. So end square brackets. And then say equals, open square brackets again, action. And then you gotta give it a method name. Whatever it is. And you can actually pass in parameters if you want, but we'll leave that one blank. But so that's one way of doing it. So you can actually call a event here on the selection change and do something to update this text block. But that seems kind of kludgy as well. So I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to take both of these things out. And instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new property in my shell view model, which is going to look a lot like this. So let's do another prop full. And it's going to be the address model, selected address, there we go. And then down here, we're going to add that notify of property change. After this time, not before. But what we'll also do is we'll also come up here, and we can actually do beforehand. We can say selected person dot, and it is their primary address equals value as well. So let's update that property to make sure it has that for later. So now we have a selected address. We can say selected address underscore full address to get that in the text block. So now we say Robert Garcia, Main Avenue, and it's still not updating. Isn't that awesome? And that's because we didn't make a change here. Selected address is now we're binding to here. So we're going to say that whenever you select a person address, that item is being bound to a selected address property. Let's try it again. Select the person, Sue Miller, first address, and there you go. Now the address is selected down below. So if you see these weird problems, make sure you get the binding right, because that really can trip you up when it comes to these applications, even little problems. But so now we have a binding to the specified selected address for Sue Miller. If I change this, notice everything blanks out. And now I can select one for Frank Garcia. If I go back to Sue Miller, there's nothing selected right now. Let's track down why. So let's go over to our shell view model. Let's look what happens if, let's walk through in our minds what happens if we select a person. When we select a person, the selected person gets updated, and that notifies the property change that a person has been selected. But where do we populate the selected address? Well, it's only when we set it when we're selecting it. So it's never being populated initially. So what we need to do is here, we need to say selected address equals value dot primary address. Now you could have said selected underscore selected person dot primary address, but that works about the same. Let's try this. So if I select Robert Thomas at 29 Main Avenue, then come to Bob Hernandez and select 101 State Street, go back to Robert Thomas, he is now at 29 Main Avenue, Madison, Washington. Which I'm not even sure if that's real address or not, doesn't matter. So now we have our selections finally being updated the way we intend them to. So you gotta make sure you think through all those use cases of how it's going to be populated, how it's going to be updated. It's not magic. It's just a framework helping us out. But sometimes if we're doing these kind of edge cases or things that are a little more unusual or off the beaten path, you have to make sure that you think through how the framework's going to work and make sure that you wire up both sides of something so that when something else is selected, that you get notified of that, and then also that when you update something, it notifies everybody else. So a couple of things that are a little tricky, but now what we have is we have a drop-down that has more than one thing in it in the display. We actually have it vertically too if you wanted to, just so you know. And then we have a second drop-down, which is a list of all of their addresses that's based upon the first selection. So it's a cascading drop-down. We could keep going with this if you wanted to, but 2 is enough, I think. And then if we select something here, it updates the main record and it displays it down below in a text block. And then it remembers it later if we come back to it. So that's how we can use combo boxes really effectively in our application. We can make them look really cool. Now this is just really basic stuff here, but I can format this any way I want. I can put a full grid in here and have a whole bunch of information displayed. I can have background gradients. I can have, fun images or colors, whatever I want to do in here if I wanted for my dropdown. Here I just have the name, a static text that says, are they alive? And a checkbox that does actually work inside of my dropdown. So then you have the cascading where the selection here affects the next dropdown. And if I select something that's not been selected before, it blanks out the dropdown selection. So it's very clear that it's connected. And this dropdown here can then affect something else on the page and go back and update the original item as well. So hopefully that unlocked for you some of the more advanced stuff you can do with a combo box. Now I would encourage you, don't stop at something like this. It's very, very basic. Do more fun stuff. I mean, there's so much you can do inside of this data template. Pretty much anything you can do in XAML, you can do right here. So you can do, like I said, a grid. You can have multiple stack panels. You can do it vertically. I'll just show it real quick. It's going to get ugly, but I just want to show that you can do it vertically. Yes, you can do it vertically. Oops, wrong one. That's probably a problem. There you go. So there you go. So now the drop-down has multiple lines, which makes the drop-down have to scroll more because of the thickness of it. But you could do coloring in here. You can do a whole bunch of different things if you wanted to. So play around with that. Try it out. Try the cascading as well. Try out the things down below. Maybe link more things to this combo box. Maybe have that the is alive, the date picker, or something else. And we'll cover some of those other controls later in other videos. But try those things out and see how they work for you and see how you can really take your application to the next level. All right. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. And we're going to have more videos coming really quickly in this series. And make sure to subscribe and make sure you're listening for those so that you can learn even more about WPF controls that might benefit you. All right. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.